Welcome back to another episode of GameSpark. Oh my gosh, so invasive. Goodness. Today's episode is episode 2. I have a very special guest in store for you guys today. I have watched him play video games pretty much all my life, and I was really curious what his answers would be to all my video gaming related questions, and he did not disappoint. So let's get to it. Today, I am very excited to have my brother! Yay! Introduce yourself, Joe, will you please?
My name is Joe Arrington. I'm Susie's older brother, and I am a drummer, a father, a volunteer firefighter, and I love video games a lot. I have my whole life, and I think that I'll probably be a pretty good candidate for this. I think I might have some good perspectives. So
awesome. Speaking of perspectives, yeah, I'm really curious with Joe because I have watched you play games all my life, and I know many of the games you've played, and I know what genres you like, and you and I like a lot of the same games, but we also don't like some of the same games. And so I'm really curious to see what your answers are going to be, because part of me feels like I know what they're going to be, and then the other part of me feels like I'm going to be surprised.
Yeah, when I saw the interview with you and Katie, I actually hadn't realized just how much having an older sibling influenced the games you see and play matters. I hadn't really thought about that. And sure enough, every time I busted out a game, you and Katie were kind of sitting there with me. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that I wasn't thinking about bearing that responsibility at the time. Because I probably been like, oh, should I be doing this to my sisters? But it's kind of cool.
That's bringing back like Silent Hill memories of like sitting and watching you play Silent Hill. Okay, so I talked about this in the last video with Katie, with our sister Katie, but in the bird watching world, there is a term that they use for the bird that first sparks their interest in bird watching, and they call that their spark bird. And so my first question for you is, what was your spark game that first got you that really made you fall in love with gaming?
It's going to be really hard to narrow most of these down to 1 or even 10, but when I was born in 84, so I played the 8-bit Nintendo in the 80s, and when we got the Super Nintendo, I got it for Christmas, and I got it with The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. And I think that was the first game. Yeah, I think, and I remember Dad and I, because Dad liked games at the time too, and he was the one who introduced me to Zelda in the first place when I was a kid. And so he and I would stay up till all hours of the night against Mom's wishes, trying to beat those temples and stuff, those castles. And I think Zelda Link to the Past is probably the one. It's the first game I can legitimately remember feeling like it was literally plucking me out of the real world and just sweeping me away into this other place. And it was like a game where even at that age, even at like 10 years old, whenever I wasn't playing it, I was just thinking about it. I was like, I cannot wait to get back to that world.
Yes. Much like me with Tears of the Kingdom right now.
Yep.
I wish I want to be playing Tears of the Kingdom. Constantly. Want to be playing Tears of the Kingdom all the time. Okay, that's a great game. I have also played Link to the Past, and I also think it's a great game. I've played almost every Zelda game in the franchise, and that is an excellent one. So this was your spark game. What is your earliest gaming memory?
I am going to do 2 because I think they're both kind of important.
That's okay. Katie did 2 as well.
Yeah. So the first one was really young because it was the very first Super Mario, which is a little cliche, but there's actually a kind of a little mini story here. I remember being at an age where I would be at a daycare after school. Mom and Dad would put me in a daycare maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And before I owned a Nintendo, the daycare had a big chunky like brick TV, and they had Super Mario Brothers. And there were, 6 of us. Yeah, there were like 6 of us in this daycare, and they had all these like puzzles and toys, but all of us were like, I want to do that. I just remember we had to take turns, but we were just fixated. We could not believe, and anyone listening has to understand that when Super Mario Brothers came out, nothing like it had ever been seen. And it's, is it dated? Yes. But at the time, it was like the pinnacle.
Yeah.
Mario was another world. Even though it's a bunch of pixels and you're just bumping bricks with your head and jumping on Goombas, it's like that was a whole other land. And I remember we would wait in line and we all had to agree because they'd make us like, if you die, you have to give it to the next kid.
Yes, that classic setup. I remember that. I remember doing that with friends.
Hard game.
Yes.
So like I would have like one shot and I'd die in the first hole and I'd be like, all right. But we would just circulate because I was so fixated on that game, and I think that was when I came home and obviously went, Mom, Dad, there's this thing at the daycare. It's a Nintendo. So that's the first game. That's one of the first gaming memories I have.
Excuse me.
And it's all good. This is pretty boring. So.
Sorry, I'm a stay-at-home mom of 2 little kids. I'm tired.
It's all good. No.
I didn't know any of this, just by the way. I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. So the other earliest memory I have is I remember I stayed home sick from school. I got the chicken pox, and I remember being itchy and, chicken pox sucked. Yeah. But that was back when we had Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, so you could rent video games. So Mom and Dad let me...
What a time to be alive.
So I was super... I was super contagious. So they were like, well... But see, with chickenpox, you don't feel that sick.
Yeah.
It's just contagious.
Yes.
So I was okay, but I wasn't... Yeah. I couldn't go to school.
Right.
So they took me to Blockbuster and we rented like a couple of Nintendo games. And, we got a couple good ones. But I remember specifically getting Mega Man 3. And... those games are so incredibly difficult, and I didn't even beat it. I didn't even beat the game, but I remember sitting cross-legged, sitting in front of this glowing blue screen, just Mega Man over and over and over and over and over, and I probably developed every bit of eye problems I have from video games probably happened in that one instance.
Those are some great gaming memories. I honestly, those are memories that I feel like I can picture little Joe sitting cross-legged on the floor playing games. I feel like I saw that. I can see that in my head. Okay, do you remember what the first game was you played and beat all by yourself?
That's a hard question because there were so many games that I got so close to the end or got pretty far, but they, like most games, especially during those times, they just made the ends so unbelievably like sadomasochistic.
Yeah, they were so unforgiving, so brutal.
Yeah. So I do remember, this is not the most exciting answer, but I do remember that I grinded and grinded and grinded on Super Mario 2. And I did finally beat Super Mario 2. That is a really difficult game.
You know what?
I had to really pull it together.
I have never beaten Super Mario 2. Never in my life.
Okay. You play Mario 2, and you're like, right, there's desert worlds, there's really different. You have no idea how hard that game gets.
No, I've never made it past a certain point.
But I think that was the first game I ever beat. And I remember being really underwhelmed. Like, I was proud of myself, but I was like, wait, now the game's just over. And I kind of remember being bummed because I'm like, wait, now there's no more game. What? Like, that's really unsatisfying.
Once again, that's how I feel about Tears of the Kingdom. I'm getting closer to the end of that game, and I'm like, I don't want it to end yet.
Well, we managed to bridge a gap between Super Mario 2 and Tears of the Kingdom. That's like really
takes a certain person.
It does.
Okay. My next question is, what are the top 3 video games? And I know it's hard to pick 3, but what are the top 3 video games that you feel have impacted you the most?
I have to say Final Fantasy VII, because I could almost argue that Final Fantasy VII could also fill the space of the earlier question, the game that got you interested in games.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would have played Final Fantasy VII if I hadn't played Link to the Past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair. Mm-hmm.
So, and then, so I have to say Final Fantasy VII. And actually, I think I'm going to say Okami.
Oh.
Because...
Okami. If you have not played Okami, do yourself a favor and play Okami. It's on sale all the time. It's on every platform.
Yeah, you can get it for unbelievably cheap.
Yeah, you can get it for like $8.99 USD. It's a phenomenal game. Oh, I remember very, very vaguely watching you play Okami before I had played it and being like, I don't understand what the deal is. Like, I don't understand the big deal.
Yeah. So Okami, because Okami will absolutely shock you with its length. Every moment you think the game's going to end, it's just like, no, man, there's this whole breadth of more stuff for you to do. And it's emotional. The music is phenomenal. The art direction is unbelievable. I mean, I remember being so immersed in that and being emotional, being everything you can imagine. That game just struck me so hard when I played it.
I don't blame you.
And it's a long game, too. You play it for a very long time.
It is. It's a long game. It has right when you think you're right at the end, all of a sudden it opens up into this whole...
But you're like halfway through.
Yeah, you're only halfway through. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
So
that's a good answer. I like that.
There are a lot of other games in that era that I could choose, but I kind of I want to be fair to the game that I really think struck me the most in that era, and it was definitely Okami.
Okay.
For the third answer, the first Dead Space for me was life-altering. Because of the genres that I really like, and because of what they achieved and how close they got to the things I like. Yeah, I would have to say Dead Space, surprisingly, because it was so scary and so realistic and so believable because they made the science fiction world they created so believable. It's just, it was so immersive and so hypnotizing, I couldn't believe it. So Final Fantasy VII, Okami, and Dead Space.
Wow. Definitely didn't expect those answers. Those are three very vastly different games, but you know what? Have any games made you cry?
Yes. I will admit that many games have made me cry.
I love that, actually. Yeah, I really do.
It may not always be full-on crying, but so there are definitely games that have made me tear up. A short list would be the indie game Celeste made me tear up.
Okay.
Okami made me tear up. Final Fantasy made me cry,
Final Fantasy VII?
Final Fantasy VII, yeah. Final Fantasy VII. There are moments in that game that just made me tear up because I was so attached to the characters and so involved. The Last of Us made me cry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an incredibly emotional game. That's a tough one. That may be the king, the one that made me like bawl, sort of like tears welling up the most. And Twilight Princess made me tear up. So there's a short list. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that short list. I think my last question is, why do you like playing video games?
I think that video games tell stories in different ways than other mediums. So movies are us watching and witnessing something go down. We're watching the story. We're watching the characters. We have people we're rooting for, stuff going on. That's amazing. Books, we're reading books. We're picturing it in our head. We're kind of filling out this tapestry of visuals in our head, and we can kind of see things, and each person is going to read a book a little different. Video games kind of manage to bridge the gap. They're not completely free, but you are making choices. They're not perfectly photorealistic, but they have such unique and beautiful art styles that if they're good enough, regardless of whether or not it looks realistic, you buy into the world you're playing no matter what. So even some of the simplest art styles in games, I've gotten lost in because it's that good. To me, that speaks volumes. I remember, may he rest in peace, Roger Ebert, before he passed away. And he didn't see the games we have now, but he made an interesting comment once. He's a very legendary movie critic who I actually agreed with on a lot of things. But there was an article once when I was much younger where he said that he said video games are not and will never be art.
Really?
And yep. Granted, he was old school. He's from another time.
Yeah.
He probably never played one. And there's certainly shortcuts you can take in games where you create something, you can replicate it. And I mean, there are shortcuts you can take to make bigger, grander, vaster games. I get that. But to say they're not art is absurd. It's probably more absurd than saying anything is not art. And something that will never die for humans is connecting with archetypes. And there are archetypes that really resonate with the human condition because life is pain. Life is also a lot of good things too, but life can be very painful. When you're put in the shoes of a video game character, of course you're not experiencing the same thing they're experiencing, but the way it tells the story, even if it's just a goofy side scroller or something simple, every game character is a specific archetype. So consider Link. Link is the ultimate penultimate good. He's the quintessential good character. He's never tempted by anything.
Right.
He's a silent protagonist. He's stoic. You can never really tell exactly what he's thinking outside of his like silly facial expressions when someone says something silly. He's actually
or
kind
he's
of
cooking or something.
yeah. But ultimately, if you think about it, Link is kind of the archetype of the ultimate good. You can always trust him. You know that he's always going to make the right choice. And I think people, even if they don't want to examine that or think that hard about it, I think people resonate with that. There's something beautiful about that. They like that. So then
he's kind of that blank slate where like he can be whatever you want him to be. He's me. True. He's you. He's whoever else is playing. And I want to save the princess. It's not even me having Link save the princess. Like, I want to save the princess. I want to get to that castle. I want to help. I want to save Hyrule. And Link makes that a lot easier to feel because he's just that stoic blank slate.
And there's comfort in knowing that he is the archetype representing good. It feels comfortable knowing that there's a type that is not going to stop until the job gets done. There's also obviously a whole other plethora of archetypes in games, just like movies and books, where you have the anti-heroes and you have villains that you're still kind of rooting for. All of these things are present in games. And so I think that why I like video games is because video games can nail a lot of archetypes in unique ways that books and movies can't. You're playing them, you're making their choices. That's why RPGs are so interesting, because they're deeper stories. Obviously, with an RPG, you're going to have choices your character's making. You know, obviously games are an escape. You know, it's a form of entertainment for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that the reason why, and there are other reasons to like things like puzzle games and maybe platformers. I don't think those are as emotional, obviously, but it's a miracle that any game, I think it was Marlon Brando that said that it's a miracle that any movie comes together and works because of all the hands that touch it. I think the same thing about games. It's amazing that many people come together and can create, you know, an experience like that and then put it in my hands for $60. Yeah. Which is absolutely worth it, right?
I agree. I
do agree. I love when people complain about game prices where they're getting like they're getting like a 100-hour game. I'm like, where else are you going to get that kind of entertainment?
Yeah.
So I would almost argue that indie games are closer to writing a book than they are to making a movie, because you really can.
I never thought about it that way, but I agree. I actually agree.
One or two people can just create an absolute masterpiece. With a pretty humble budget, as long as they have good ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the skills. And certainly there are some low budget movies out there that make it, but I just think that, you know, it's amazing that, and what a time to be alive, right? That if you have a good enough idea, and then another thing I love about the gaming community is if a game really is that good, it'll usually rise up. It's like, it doesn't matter how small the budget was or how silly the introductory Kickstarter moment was or whatever. If a game really does rule and it's that good, it might take a few years for it to catch on, but the word of mouth is like, holy crap. Because I remember when I first saw the Hollow Knight trailers, I was impressed by the artwork, but I remember thinking, okay, another side scroller.
I love that game so much.
Yeah, Hollow Knight is
like
mind-blowing.
A spiritual experience for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I love games so much.
That was kind of a very long-winded reason, but I have thought about this very hard, because why are they different from other mediums? And there's got to be a more intelligent reason to like them than just, well, I get to sit on my fat butt and play it. You know, it's like very, very, very much deeper than that. So anyway.
Thank you so much. That was such a great inspired answer. I was curious what these answers were going to be, and wouldn't you know it, I was actually surprised, but I was pleasantly surprised. Part of what got me started with all this is a negative comment I got on one of my videos where I cried at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom. You know, it got me thinking, like, well, how is a video game any different than crying in a movie or crying in a book? And in a way, like you said, I almost feel like it's more immersive because it is you that is making those decisions, and you are doing the fighting, and you are trying to make those choices, and you are the one that stands between evil and the rest of Hyrule or the rest of, you know, Super Mario World or whatever. And that puts you in a really interesting place.
It's like the perfect trifecta of unique art, visual medium and literature. It's like, that's what video games are.
And I love
them
for it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your crazy schedule to chat with me about games. I've learned a lot, and I have been really inspired, actually, by a lot of what you've said about video games as a medium and whatnot. And I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Huge shout out to my brother for taking the time to talk to me and bestow upon me all his insight into gaming. He's a pretty great guy. I love him a lot, and he obviously has pretty great taste in games. If you would like to watch last week's episode, you can do that right here. That was my very first ever GameSpark interview with my younger sister, Katie, who also loves playing video games. It's definitely worth a watch. So what's your Spark game? What's your earliest gaming memory? Let me know. I love hearing people's stories. I'll see you guys next time.